Right, hello everyone. So today I am going to go through the notes for Chapter 2, Section 1, Ecosystems Description. So today is going to be basically just sort of like laying out a lot of different definitions and getting a sense of the different things we talk about and words we use in talking about ecosystems. Okay, now some of this you probably have already had before. I know that in elementary school, middle school stuff that you guys do work on ecosystems and things like that. So some of this stuff is probably familiar with you. For you, I mean, there'll be some things that you are not as familiar with. Okay, as I go along. So, all right. So the first thing is actually, you know what? Let's do that. Okay. So the first definition in our notes here are biotic versus abiotic. Now, one thing to know is that in science, the prefix bio typically means life. So like biology is the study of life. So when we're talking about biotic versus abiotic here, bio is also referring to life here. So biotic is all the living factors within an ecosystem. Plants, animals, microbes, anything living, but only the living stuff. All right. Whereas abiotic, as you might imagine then, is the opposite. All the non-living factors within an ecosystem. So if it's living, it qualifies as biotic. If it's non-living, it qualifies as abiotic. So what are some of the non-living things? Sometimes those are harder to think of for people. Water, like the amount, the type, is it, lakes, is it ocean, is it river, that type of thing. Climate. Okay, what's the climate like? I give you an example for one of the homework questions, because they're asking about this, of one of our abiotic components of the area in which we live is that we have 4 distinct seasons. Okay, that's an abiotic thing. Land type. Okay, is it rich soil? Do we have is it flat land? Is it mountainous? Is it rivers and valleys, like that kind of thing? The weather. Now, weather is different from climate. Climate's like generic average type thing. Weather would be do we have a lot of tornadoes? Is it very rainy? So you talk about the Pacific Northwest. Is it rains a lot? Okay, that kind of stuff. So those are all abiotic components. Altitude. Is it at sea level? Is it really high? That kind of stuff. Okay, those are all abiotic components. All of those things together, the biotic and the abiotic, the living and the non-living, combine together to make up all the components of the ecosystem. All right. Okay, so we've got a bunch of definitions here of things that are essentially like sort of grouping and categorizing different sort of categories of ways to group both like living and non-living things within the ecosystem. So the second page of your notes, I'm going to see if I can zoom out here a little. So I'm using my iPhone here because we're home today. So the second page is sort of a flow chart of the organization, like an organizational diagram for environmental systems, like it says. And it starts at the top. Biosphere is up here at the biosphere is the largest, or most, you can think of it also as most general or all-inclusive category. Most general. Okay, and then down at the bottom, all the way down the bottom of the population is the smallest category, or most specific. Okay, so I'm going to be jumping back and forth between the definition and the category as we go through this. Okay, so I'm going to start actually at the large. So I'm going to kind of jumping around on the definitions here as well. So I'm going to start with the definition of biosphere. All the species on Earth, along with all their environments, together as one huge ecosystem. Technically not really an ecosystem, but kind of for lack of a better term, like just one huge thing altogether. Biosphere, life sphere. This is essentially the Earth. Everything on the Earth. That's the most general category. So that starts at the top. The largest and most general. Everything on the Earth, living and non-living, everything together. Okay. Then we jump down to a little more specific of a categorization, the biome. So a biome, as you can see, we're working our way up here, is a group of related ecosystems or landscapes. Okay. So in our books, somewhere, I should have had this page up, I'm sorry. Yeah, here we go. So again, let me see if I can, kind of limited with my iPhone here. So in your book, this is on page 42. It lists like a bunch of different biomes. These are the major terrestrial biomes. So the biome like desert, grasslands and prairies, tropical rainforest, like really big generic. And then there's actually a map on page 43 of like the world distribution of major terrestrial biomes. And you can see like in the United States, we've got actually quite a few crossing across this here. So there's tallgrass prairie, there's, what's this one? Temperate deciduous forest. Deciduous, by the way, is the term for trees that drop their leaves in the winter versus like evergreen, like conifers. Okay. You can see we've got conifer forest coming down. There's, what's that purple? Temperate rain, really? Is that? Yeah, temperate rainforest. Exactly, Pacific Northwest. Okay, so those are biomes. Very, very large and sort of general, all-inclusive type things. Okay, then, so biome is next. So then after biomes, we narrow it down even more to something called landscapes. Okay, landscapes are a group of interacting ecosystems. So essentially, just landscape is very simple. It's you get a group of ecosystems together that are interacting. Okay. All right, then we go to ecosystems/ecotones. Okay, so let's start with ecosystem. An ecosystem is a dynamic. Dynamic means changing. Okay, a dynamic or changing complex, like group, complex just mean group, of plant, animal, and microorganism communities, and the non-living environment, which is, what are we calling that? That's the abiotic factors, right? So biotic and abiotic, interacting as a functional unit within an explicit or specific space. Okay, so it's a specific grouping of plants, animals, and microorganism communities and all the non-living abiotic factors working together in a specific area. Okay, what are ecotones? So ecotones are a region of overlap where one ecosystem transitions into another. So if you think about it, it makes sense. Like, it's not like ecosystems are all in their own bubble and then you have to like open a door and go from one ecosystem to the other and immediately you're in one. You start in one ecosystem and you're in another. There's areas of overlap, right? Okay, now your book shows these as well. So get to examples here. Okay. So in our book on page 29, it's got an example of, so we've got a deciduous forest ecosystem. We've got a grassland ecosystem. Okay, and the deciduous forest, you'd have deciduous forest species, both plants and animals. And the grassland species, you'd have in the grassland ecosystem, you'd have grassland species, both animals and plants. And then in the middle, where they overlap, you get this grassland forest ecotone, the area in the middle where one transitions into the other. Okay, and you get some species from either using that edge, that ecotone area. Okay, so that transfer area. They give you another example in here, and this is a really good example because, okay, so this is a terrestrial to aquatic transfer or transition. You've got ecosystem 1, which is a land ecosystem, terrestrial. You've got ecosystem 2, an aquatic ecosystem like a pond or something like that. The transition in between is the ecotone marshland. Okay. Hopefully, as you've grown up, you guys have heard stuff about marshland and how they try to protect marshland, and it's, marshland is. A lot of marshlands are federally protected. That's because marshland is technically an ecotone. The marshland ecosystems are an ecotone, like a transitioning between aquatic and land, and therefore they're more rare. And there are certain species that can only really survive in that ecotone, in that marshland area. And since it's a transitional area, they're not as common. They're a little more rare, and so therefore we try to protect those areas to try to help the species, both plants and animals, that exist in those areas. Okay? All right. So that's ecotone. Now, next. So ecosystems and ecotones, a little more specific. So you got biosphere, biome, landscapes, ecosystems, ecotones. We're working our way down here. Biotic communities is next. So I'm just going to kind of check off as we do this, just so I know what we've gone through here. Okay, so the next one is biotic communities. So we're going to jump up to this. Biotic communities is a grouping or assemblage of plants, animals, and microbes present in a natural area. So remember, biotic is living, right? So we are basically talking about just the living portion of a group of things. So within an ecosystem, you know how we talked about ecosystem being both the living and the non-living stuff. So essentially, a biotic community is the living portion of an ecosystem, okay? Which is why it's a little more specific than ecosystems here. It's just the living portion of them, okay? All right. Then we get down. Now you can see here, I kind of branch off into associations. It's not a more specific sort of category under biotic communities because not everything breaks into an association. So associations are specific. Associations are plant communities. Specifically plant communities, with a definite composition. That means specific plants. Okay. Uniform habitat characteristics. In other words, the habitat is the same throughout the same area. Okay, you're not transitioning from one type of habitat to another. So all one type of habitat, specific grouping of plants, specific types of plants, and uniform plant growth. Uniform means all the same. Okay, now it doesn't mean they all have to be the exact same, but you're talking about like, generically you get the same amount of growth across all the plants. That is an association. Okay, so like you could have like all the different tall grass species within a prairie, tall grass prairie. That could be an association. Okay, so association, since it's just plants, I kind of like did it off to the side because it's not more specific in terms of like animals or other things for the biotic communities. Okay, so the plant, but it's not broken down to the species level yet because it's still a grouping of plant community. Okay, so that's why it's not down here yet. So next we get to species. We've done associations. Now we get to species. Remember, we're getting more specific as we go down. Species. A population that can interbreed and produce fertile offspring. Now, the definition of species here can take a little bit of explanation in the terms of, if you look at different scientists sometimes will have different definitions of species because it depends on how they focus on it. But in general, most of them contain these two things. They need to be able to interbreed. That means the organisms need to be able to breed with each other and produce fertile offspring. So there's really two parts to this, all right? Interbreed and produce fertile offspring. Now, the breeding part, interbreed, should be pretty obvious. Like if they can't interbreed, then it's not a species because they can't continue on the line or anything like that. They can't reproduce, and it's not going to be a species. It's nothing. Okay. The produce fertile offspring part is a little interesting because you can get some species that can actually interbreed. They're very close genetically and physiologically. Physiologically means like how they're built physically. But they don't produce fertile offspring. All right. Now, what are some examples of this? Well, some examples would be a mule. Okay, a mule, excuse me, is the offspring of a male donkey and a female horse. Mules, let me see if I can do this without totally messing up the video. Sorry guys, I wish I had my, it's not gonna rotate that way, is it? Okay. I'm gonna try something. Hopefully I don't mess up the video. Okay. So, mules are the offspring of a male donkey and a female horse. Okay. Mules are actually sterile. They cannot reproduce. Okay. Now, when we talk about being sterile, like you can probably find for some of these things like some weird mutated version that could reproduce, but in general, they can't reproduce. Not reproduce like a species can. So, if you look, it says mules and hinnies. Hinnies are the opposite. So like a mule is technically what did I say? Male donkey, female horse. Okay, whereas the female donkey and a male horse, so the flip of that is sometimes called a hinny. Hinnies are not as common. If you think about it, it makes sense because the female has to carry the offspring, right? So it's sort of like if you think about like dog breeding, like you want if you're mixing sort of breeds of dogs, or like in this case, you'd want the larger one to be the female. You don't want the smaller one to be the female, because then if the offspring is really big, then it can lead to complications in pregnancy and stuff. Killing the female, or leading to complications and maybe the offspring not being born. Being something, complications happening and dying in birth or something like that. So it's more common to have the larger of the two species to be the female, to be a successful pregnancy when they can do that. But mules are actually like a majority of the mules are infertile. And it's because they have a different number of chromosomes, and so they're different species. So even though they can interbreed, they don't produce offspring the offspring then cannot breed typically. So mules themselves are a sort of like a hybrid, but they're not a species because they can't reproduce. Okay. Now, there are some other sort of really kind of cool, weird examples of this you can find. let me, ever heard of a liger? Ligers are actually real. Okay, now if you look at images, you gotta be careful because you got all kinds of weird fake stuff that people put up. But a liger themselves are actually real. Ligers are the offspring of a male lion and a female tiger. Now the opposite is called a tigon. Okay, and you can see here's a picture of ligers. Hopefully I can focus on that. There we go. Crossbreed of a male lion and a female tiger. They're pretty cool. They're usually bigger. Like they're usually really big. But most of them again are sterile. Here's a tigon. The cross between a tiger and a lion of the opposite. And again, they're really rare because it's interbreeding of two different species, and the offspring are sterile. They can't reproduce. Okay. So I was gonna see if, oh, here's some other examples. They are huge. It's kind of weird. They're usually bigger than both species. Kind of cool. So if you look up, I'm not going to do it all because I don't want to make this video super long. Usually when we're in class, we do like a whole thing on this. It's kind of cool. But if you look up hybrid animals, you'll get lists. Now you got to kind of watch and make sure they're real and not fake. But like, there's some really cool ones. A Pizzly. A Pizzly is a cross between a polar bear and a grizzly, which are actually two different species of bear. A Wholphin is a cross between a killer whale and a dolphin. So there's some really cool ones. If you're, you want to mess around, like look up hybrid animals. They're pretty cool. So, but the main thing with this is, if I'm gonna switch you, see if I can do this without losing the video here. Okay, switch back to this is that those are hybrids. They're not species. They're not different species, because even though they can interbreed, they do not produce fertile offspring. Okay. All right. So we were down to species on our list here. Then the only sort of breakdown or category more specific than species is a population, right? What's a population? Well, a population is a grouping of individuals that live within a given geographic area. So a population is just individuals of a species that live in a certain area. Right? Just more specific, more sort of a smaller grouping, more specified. Okay, so that's it for 2-1. If you guys have any questions, let me know. The homework there is on the. I would use the one that I put up on the Google Classroom, because I added some stuff from the numbers in the book to help you out, to help you answer them. Okay, if you guys got questions, let me know.